Hi, folks. Jen, Kim, Mecca, thanks for joining today. I'm going to set the stage for this conversation, and then we will jump on in. So for the folks at home, this is the Revenue Collective webinar, the data behind building a world-class sales team. If you were expecting something else, like, I don't know, the Great British Bake Off or something, now's your time to peace out, go turn on BBC. But our panelists are delightful, so you might want to stick around anyway. I'm Teddy Chestnut, host and moderator for the conversation today. I'm the co-founder and CRO of a Series A startup called Bright Hire. We're like Gong, but instead of capturing and analyzing sales calls, we capture and analyze interviews, so teams can hire as well as they sell. And we're here to talk today about how to build the foundations for an effective, predictable, and scalable hiring process for AEs. And to do that, we're going to share some data that we pulled from a survey primarily of CROs and heads of sales in collaboration with the Revenue Collective group. And we're going to combine that with the perspectives and expertise and hard-earned experience from these three super accomplished sales leaders on the screen with me right now. It's going to be fun, and practical, and tactical, and other words that rhyme with actical. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. Kim Miller on my bottom right, head of North America sales for LinkedIn's search and staffing business, which is what, Kim, like a $400-500 million business?
Globally, we're an $800 million business.
$800 million business, so double that number. Jen Brannigan, CRO of Pendo, up my top right, unicorn valued over $1 billion. Mecca, now a partner at one of the top tier early stage VC funds, first round capital, but previously VP of sales and service for Mixpanel and at Stripe. Kim, Jen, Becca, thank you again for joining me today to talk about the most important priority, hiring. So we're going to dive into the data, and I'm super excited to get your take on it. But before we jump in, we'll do quick intros just to orient the folks at home. So we'll do a bit of a round robin. Can you give a sense of three things? The size of the team that you're managing now or that you managed, the average range or the average ACV of the deals that your team close, and how you would characterize the nature of the sale that your team leads. Transactional, consultative, data-driven, evangelical, just so we get a sense and a grounding for the AEs that you're hiring, what are they stepping into? Kim, we can start with you. Size, ACV, and how you characterize the sale that your team leads.
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer because I manage our full stack business, meaning that acquisition all the way through our relationship managers, all the way through our global accounts teams. So we sell to customers that can come in, buying one product from LinkedIn, maybe spending $6,000 a year with us, to our largest customers at LinkedIn that spend north of 20 million. And so you can imagine the experience level of the reps that we're bringing into the business span all, and we hire at all levels. So it's not just a matter of you getting in at the ground level and working your way up through the organization. We're bringing them in at every single level of the business. There are about 125 employees in North America and about 500 that support search and staffing globally today.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Jen, how about you? Team, ACV. Oh, wait, Kim, you missed one. The nature of the sale. Consultative, data-driven, evangelical, transactional, all of those things.
It's literally all of the things. And the gift of running a full stack business is that you get the opportunity to understand and see every buying behavior from every different style customer possible on the planet. And so I would say we touch every single type of process that you can imagine. Cool.
All right, Jen, now over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and really happy to be here. So I am CRO for Pendo. I, full disclosure, am 5 weeks into the new role after spending 10 years leading various go-to-market teams at LinkedIn. So my team is currently about 200, and I have all of the revenue organizations as well as RevOps and the support organizations that go along with that. We're about 120 AEs, and we run everything from small business all the way up to very large enterprise accounts. And so similar to Kimberly, when you talk about ACV, we have a business Pendo for startups, which, average deal sizes there are around 10K, a little bit of a faster sales cycle. And then we go all the way up to 6-figure, sometimes 7-figure deals. The nature of our sale is actually quite consultative. We are selling into product leaders and digital transformation officers around using analytics, user sentiment, feedback, guides to, improve the world's experience with software. And so really being able to go in and do a consultative sell, help our buying customers and buying personas deeply understand what our product can do to transform their businesses is a core skill that we look for in our AEs.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Excited to have you on the panel today. Mecca, over to you.
Hey, everyone. Nice to be here. Jennifer, it sounds like we're a little bit doppelganger. In my most recent sales role, I led global sales and services at Mixpanel, similar to Jennifer, managing from SMBs where there was Mixpanel for startups, ACV around 10K, all the way up to the enterprise business where we had 6- and 7-figure deals. I led professional services, account management, and I would say on the bottom end of the spectrum, faster sales cycles, more transactional, but all of our business we really thought of as consultative, selling into product leaders. And prior to Mixpanel, I led SMB sales at Stripe, so a 50-person organization, much smaller ACVs in year one, but the sort of go-to-market motion there was acquiring high-growth startups that quickly turned into the 6- and 7-figure deals. And now I sit at a partner at First Round where a lot of our companies are looking at sort of getting revenue from 0 to 1 million in ARR. So it's been fun seeing the gamut of really early stage and sort of a little bit more mature.
Awesome. Thanks, Mecca. Excited to have you on. All right, so we're going to jump into the data. I'm going to provide a little bit of context around this survey that we ran, and then we'll go from there. So we partnered with the Revenue Collective, like I mentioned, to gather input from about 130 CROs and sales leaders. And so this is the demographics right here, skews toward very senior, like VP, SVP, C-suite, or kind of RVP director, and skews a little bit more toward growth stage, right? So 100 to 1,000 represents about 80% of the respondents. So we're getting input here from honestly, folks like in your shoes, right? Building teams, building the operation and growing. And the first question that we asked this crew, and I'm not going to show the results yet because I'm going to ask for your input first. But the first question we asked was, what are the traits that you look for in a sales hire? If you were to stack rank the top 1 or 2 things that you are consistently looking for as you build your team and you bring on frontline AEs, what are they? So we'll share what it looks like in a little bit. But I'm curious, maybe Jen, to start with you. You just stepped into your role. You're 5 weeks in. You're thinking about building the team. What are the top traits that you look for and that you want your managers looking for in frontline AEs?
Yeah, so what's absolutely critical for us first and foremost are strong communication and listening skills. It's really anchoring on the ability to be able to connect with your customers, do deep and rich discovery. We look for a track record of success. So AEs who can truly demonstrate that they have been able to not only hit their quotas, but they've had a strong career trajectory of growth in previous roles and at previous companies. Intellectual curiosity, the desire to learn. Our product is a very technical sale, and there just aren't that many people out there who have that perfect technical background. So we always look for people who really want to learn and deeply understand kind of more deeply technical sales, the personas of our buyer, and who just are hungry to learn more and to continue to develop their skills because our technology is always changing, it's always improving. And then finally, alignment with our values. We want to make sure interviewing is a two-way process, that the people that we are bringing in are the kind of people who want to work at Pendo as well, and the kind of people who it's not just about what they do, but about how they do it. And so there's always a really strong anchor around a match with our culture and our values.
Kim, in your org where you have this massive span from global enterprise down to SMB, do you see any important variation in what you're looking for in sellers as you think about going up and down that stack, or are there certain things that are absolutely core no matter where you're playing across the business?
Yeah, and I would say, like, although I think traits are important, I spend more time on competencies, identifying what competencies or skills the candidates would need in order to be successful out the gates in the role, and then recognizing what skills or competencies I'm willing to train or teach. And so if we're bringing someone in, understanding that not all experience is equal, understanding actually the competencies that they are subject matter experts in, and the fact that they can demonstrate that allows me to understand what their onboarding may look like, and their likelihood of success early on is going to be important. But if I'm focusing also on traits, I would say +1 to everything that Jen said. I would add adaptability to change as an important trait or characteristic that I would look for in someone coming into an organization that is moving as quickly as ours, and it is the case for most, rapidly moving startups and companies going through the evolution we are today. A willingness to learn is always top of my list. And then, of course, the standard grit and determination has stuck with me for 20 years. I want those people that are willing to, bounce back from the no.
Got it. This was, I'm going to share, these were the results. You hit on a lot of them. Communication at the very top, curiosity and kind of continuous growth. And learning, grit, resilience, good listening, and accountability. Mecca, is there anything as your Jen and Kim's responses, you're looking at, this is the results from 130 of our friends in the role. Is there anything that jumps out at you in terms of what's on the screen here or what you've heard already?
Yeah, no, I think Jen and Kim hit it right on the head. I would say the one thing that I really over-indexed on was, we just called it intellectual horsepower. So one of the things, and we felt like this was important for our AEs and our sales managers from SMB all the way to enterprise, just because we were selling really complex products. At Stripe, we were selling it to developers, a lot of category creation with new products. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we throw at our AEs, they'd be able to communicate it to our end customers, who were pretty sophisticated. So I've kind of stuck with that as the core that I'm always looking for. I think there's a lot of things that you can coach. And then obviously I think the grit and resilience, if you don't have somebody who's willing to run through walls, like, you don't really have much.
So one commonality across all of these kind of competencies, or what's on the screen here, is like, you might categorize them as soft skills. Obviously they're not soft, but they're not things that you can, run a test on, right? It's not, can you code? And so one of the things that we asked the crew was, how do you test for these traits in the course of getting to know somebody, and like, what actually gives you the most signal in the process? And so these were the responses, right? Interviews, not surprisingly, like running behavioral interviews is like the core. A lot of folks following that with mock sales pitches and kind of role plays. And then kind of a distant third is not a ton of people kind of giving homework assignments, having folks like write, a mock, outbound email or a LinkedIn message or kind of a cadence or sequence. But when I was looking at this data, like, literally none of these is above 50%. So no matter what you're doing, it seems like there's still a lot of opportunity to get more signal from any of these interactions in the process, especially when you're trying to get something, signal on traits like grit, adaptability, curiosity, intellectual horsepower. And so I'm sure that you all run interviews. Did you all also run mock role plays or pitches? Like, show of hands real quick. Yes, no. Okay, so what were your secrets for getting the most signal possible out of that limited time that you had with candidates? Like, Mecca, we come back to you. Like,
yeah,
you're trying to test for some grit. If you don't have it, you don't have anything. Like, you have half an hour with a candidate between an interview and a mock pitch. Like, how are you actually understanding whether that person has grit and adaptability, or is going to run through a brick wall?
Yeah, there's a couple of things we did. One, after the mock pitch, I'd always debrief and be like, what did you think you did well, and where do you think you could improve? And I think it was really telling sometimes when people flopped and they realized where they flopped, and sometimes they'd be like, let's run it back. And seeing the person sort of take that feedback right away shows a ton. I'd actually almost rather see that than the person who absolutely crushed it, but probably had one or two areas that they could have done better. And they just said, I feel pretty good about what I did. Like, there's no room for improvement. Like that. That's also really telling.
I'm curious, Kim, you had your hand up on, like, you've run mock pitches or role plays. Are there any any criteria, any way that you've designed those that you feel like leads to much higher signal outcomes than others?
Yeah, I don't know if it's in design, but I would say it might be in the setup of the environment, meaning that I always encourage at least 2 leaders to sit in, or someone who's on a leadership bench in the organization to sit in on the interview process. I often think that there's 2 things that happen. The person who's interviewing is thinking about the next question they're not going to ask and not actually listening to the answers of the candidate. And I think when you have a second person sitting in the room and taking notes and really listening to the candidate, it allows them to ask the right second level questions. Same thing with the mock. I think there are 2 things that happen, either like some unconscious bias around communication skills, or that interviewer gets distracted at some component because maybe they've heard this a dozen times or so. I think having that second person in the room to be the ears as you're the eyes or the facilitator absolutely changes the game for the perspective that you have on the traits or skills or competencies that you're looking for that AE to demonstrate. And oftentimes it's even better spotted by someone who's currently in the role. So as a leader, taking a high performing AE and asking them to sit in on that mock actually gives you some really amazing perspective of someone who's executing in this every single day and is more relevant from a day-to-day responsibility.
Got it. What's an example, Kim, of like a mock pitch or like a prompt that you put together? Like, just try to be very practical for folks on the line who are thinking about, like, I've got to design my interview process right now. Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, I think oftentimes if I'm hiring someone who's already in a current sales position, I would just ask them to sell me what they currently sell. I think assuming that someone is going to be able to get up to speed and pitch you on your current product and do it in a way in which they demonstrate the purest form of comfort is a little uncomfortable, right? And so I would rather just understand what they currently sell and have them pitch me on it. I think that's always most successful.
Jen, Mecca, do you have a different perspective on this? I know there's a camp of actually make them learn our thing. It's going to see, how much they lean in and how much they absorb. Like, have you ever run mock pitches or role plays where it is like, okay, do some homework on our company and pitch us?
I can chime in here. One thing that I think that Pendo has evolved to, which is really interesting, is adding the buyer persona into the mock that we run. And so because we are selling into a product persona, we've started to engage some of our product managers to participate in these calls, just to get a deeper understanding as to, can this person tailor their approach to my unique needs? What kind of discovery and kind of second level, third level questions are they asking to dig deeper and truly understand a day in the life of me and kind of to get to my real pain points? And, I do believe that, pitching your own product and what you're selling every day gives you a good sense of positioning. And then just to add a little bit of flavor to that in terms of adaptability, and can this person actually sell into a different persona? Have they done the right amount of research to understand our buyer? It's been very telling, and it's kind of helped us really weed out some false positives that we've gotten along the way in terms of mishires.
It's a very good transition. Okay, so who's made a mishire? Okay, yeah, everybody, right? And like everybody who's on the line is like raising their hand, even though they're not on screen. So it goes wrong, right? Like hiring is hard. I'm curious when it goes wrong, when either you've made a mistake or you've seen a manager make a mistake. Are there any common pitfalls, any common traps that you see folks falling into in the assessment process? And they're like, okay, we had the false positive, right? Or, it's hard to tell false negative unless you follow that person on LinkedIn. They're super successful elsewhere. But the false positives, like, I know, Mecca, you were nodding your head. What are the things that you see most commonly go wrong in the interview process that lead to regrettable hires?
I mean, I feel like it always shows up in the hiring conversation, but when I think about the mishires that really stand out most in my mind, like we knew there was a strong chance it was going to happen, and for some reason we still hired that person. So I think oftentimes, and we probably can touch on this later, but I think of whoever runs the hiring session, like they've got a very important role in like making sure one person doesn't strong arm the conversation, or like really teasing out like, hey, I feel like I'm hearing this thing over and over and over. Why do we think this candidate is going to overcome this thing when they show up here? So I just, I always go back to that initial hiring conversation. And I think if you have a pretty full panel, for the most part, these things reveal themselves. And I think it's just up to the hiring committee to have a really good conversation around, can we de-risk this? And if not, leave. And I think for me, at least, I've made my biggest hiring mistakes when the hole was gaping and you really, 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 really wanted somebody in seat. And even though I'd always say like, hey, we've got this bar, we're never going to go below it. I think there are times where you're seeing your 15th candidate and they're like, okay, this is the best of 15. But that still doesn't mean they cleared the bar that you've got to set for yourself and hold as an organization.
Jen, you were nodding your head a lot along the way. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I'll add, first of all, not just what the candidate has achieved and what they've done, but how they've done it, and making sure that how aligns with how you do business and the stage that your company is at or your team is at the moment. Sometimes when we've made mishires, it was because I don't know that we set the right expectations. And this has happened at LinkedIn, and it's definitely happened at Pendo as well, as to where we are from a growth perspective, what kind of infrastructure we have, what the role actually will really entail. And so ensuring that you're crystal clear with candidates as well, and really probing in those areas that are unique and specific to the stage of growth you're at and what the actual core responsibilities of the role are. But I do agree that, a really robust and well-structured interview process, especially if you do really thorough debriefs and challenge each other at the end, I think is really, really helpful in trying to weed out some of those challenges.
I'm going to show some of the data on this one. Although, Mecca, I think you added an interesting angle to it. So when we asked, what came up was, not surprisingly, like, it's just hard to measure intangibles. Like, does this person actually have great, or are they actually going to be able to overcome this thing that, maybe we've got a flag on? But the two next, I think, Jen, maybe speak to what you were describing, which is like, we looked at their LinkedIn profile, we looked at their resume. They were successful in some other context, another company or another experience, industry experience. And so we just bet on that without going deep on, are they fit for our culture, our context? I'm curious, Kim, how have you helped your teams balance? Sometimes mental heuristics are helpful, right? Like, this person has seen this before. They are going to hit the ground running. They do have pattern recognition. That can be helpful. It can also be harmful, right? Heuristics can be helpful and harmful in lots of ways in hiring. It can introduce a lot of bias as well. How have you helped your teams place the right amount of weight on, success in another company or previous industry experience, balanced with your focus on like competencies and skills in the role?
Yeah. I would probably take a step back from this and just say that I think you hire the best when you're proactive, not reactive, meaning that you're building a relationship with the candidates and you're measuring these things before you go into the interview process. So one of our requirements is constantly understanding where my leaders sit with their bench of future candidates. So they're, keeping that bench warm in the pipeline for future hires. And so if they can build those relationships more casually over like a coffee chat, that you're not testing for those skills, you're asking questions to better understand this person. And so those always equate to the better experience. I think everyone is going to have a different preference for when they hire. I think the important part is to call out when you're identifying unconscious bias around any of these buckets and more equally measure them. And so I would say, I want to almost go back to the communication component, which is we often have a preference for communication based on our current environment. And so we had a consultant come in and do some coursework for us about 2 years ago and highlighted the fact that if you have an employee that you're hiring from an organization that had their own language and they came in to interview with you, that your perception of them would be different because they might use different words. An example would be, especially in sales, maybe they came from an organization where they used language like, I crushed my quota, I killed the competition. And then your hiring manager says, oh, this person seems too aggressive for the job. Like, these are the areas in which we're trying to fine tune so that we're not over indexing on any of these buckets, but being more conscious about how we're equally measuring the components that we believe are of value for the job that we're hiring.
Super helpful. I mean, one of the things that happens, you talked about like building a bench and being proactive. And of course, like every hiring manager should be out there sourcing and working with their talent team to do so. Again, heuristics can be very helpful. Like, there's a big ocean to fish in. And so sometimes we start with who's at the companies that are like ours, who's in the industry that we work in. Mecca, when you were kind of building the teams that you led, how did you think about this influencing your sourcing strategy? Like, where did you fish proactively, and how much of that was informed by this is a like industry, this is a SaaS tech product versus I'm just going to try to find people who might have the right competencies and traits to be successful.
Yeah, we didn't do much of the lookalike audience search. Again, I think because we really over-indexed on the intellectual horsepower. So a lot of what we were looking at was the team at Stripe that originally built was a very non-traditional profile. And I think that fit for the stage of where we were, where there wasn't a great playbook. We were still building the plane as we were flying it, but we also still needed to hit our ARR targets. So our recruiting process was far more just like looking at a bunch of people with very different experiences and sort of the trajectory in those experiences. And then back to some of the hiring process things, I think one of the things that I really loved is I ran the same interview for 4 years over and over and over again. So it was really easy for me to say, for an L1, this person was 75th percentile, or for an L4, this person was 25th percentile in this interview, because I just run it so many times. And that's how we built our whole hiring panel. We'd take one person, they would do the same interview, test for the same criteria over and over again. And I just felt like it made it so much easier for people to say, okay, I'm looking and I'm testing on these couple of skills, and I've got a full breadth of candidates built up over time that I can compare this person to.
What you're describing there is like you're personally calibrating, right? You're getting enough at bats to know what good looks like. This becomes really difficult to scale. You bring in new hiring managers. You bring in Kim's bringing in a peer who hasn't run 400 of these. I'm curious, like Kim, in your instance, right? You know, a large team of interviewers and hiring managers. They all haven't run 400 of the same interview like Mecca did. Like, how do you drive that calibration across the team so that people actually know what good looks like and where the bar actually is?
Yeah. We have a slightly unfair advantage that the majority of my hiring managers came from the search and staffing industry. So they were staffing recruiters in the past and sold staffing services. So I think that does give us a bit of a leg up. But I would say that my teams are constantly working together in order to calibrate across all teams. And oftentimes the individuals that we're hiring might not get placed in one team or another. Like, we're not definitively deciding that when a manager goes to hire. It's a group hiring process in a way that I actually think allows us to create more consistency and to better select the highest qualified candidates. Same thing with our bench. Our bench isn't a singular manager owns that talent bench. Everyone owns the talent bench, and we're all responsible for fostering those relationships prior to hiring those candidates so that we can get the best ready now people to come on board. 50% of my acquisition team and SMB reps are getting promoted every single year to higher level positions in the organization. So we are on the talent hamster wheel. So this hasn't been the first time we've experienced a high rate of hiring. This isn't just like we're seeing a surge in growth, although we are. We know that this is happening, so we can be more proactive, act as one unified team of hiring managers, and all rely on each other's strengths to select the best candidates and develop them and promote them up. Like, that's our that's our objective in any given quarter or year.
Jen, you're 5 weeks into this kind of new gig. How are you getting your arms around what calibration looks like? Like, what bar has the team set, and what do they believe good looks like? And does that align with what you think good looks like? Like, how much of that work are you doing right now? And what does that work look like?
Yeah, it's a great call. Like, we have the complete opposite in the sense that we are in hyper growth mode right now. And so a lot of people who are interviewing are new to the interviewing panels. I'm new to Pendo, as an example. And so we don't have that long history of data points to look at to appropriately calibrate. So we really need to build in a very robust kind of program, if you will, and structure to our interviewing process to ensure that we are all starting to build towards some sense of calibration. And so the way we do that is by really, dividing up who is interviewing for what specific competencies, skills, or experiences. Then we're working on creating, we're not there yet, but we're working on creating a rubric that can be used in terms of like what's good, what's better, and what's best. And I think by having sort of that rubric in place and really starting to understand how we calibrate against good, better, best, we'll start to be able to develop more of that machine, if you will, where we can start to flow candidates through and have more consistency in our assessments. We'll start to get to know each other a little bit better on who grades in what way. Interestingly enough for me, coming in as the CRO, our CEO, Todd Olson, is highly, highly involved in Pendo's hiring. He interviews every candidate. So what I'm working through with him right now is, how can he and I calibrate to ensure that we're on the same page so that I can ultimately step in and really help be that final executive interviewer that can really make the go, no go decision on somebody that the team has put in front of us. And so, some of it is a matter of time, but some of it is a matter of putting the right structure, the right interviewing format questions, and the right measurement scales into place.
Yeah, Mecca, you had this like mental rubric in your head of like what's 25th percentile and what's 75th percentile. Did you ever codify that? Like, did you actually create something to spread across the team? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, we did. We had by level for each of the questions what below average, average, and above average was like. And I think after doing the interview a number of times, you didn't have to go back to the rubric to understand where things were. But I do think that there's a lot of power in writing this whole process down such that when you do have someone new, we would have that person shadow an experienced interviewer a couple of times before they then would be sort of conducting the interview with somebody else shadowing them and making sure that that calibration process worked with the rubric as a guide. And that's how we sort of would think about scaling the number of interviewers who could be involved in the process.
There's a lot at stake in getting all of this right. Obviously, you're spending a lot of time where you're sourcing, you're calibrating, you're trying to run an effective process. We asked folks, how much is at stake? So like, what is the cost of an AE mishire? This is what we got back. So 80% of the folks who responded said it was at least more than 50K. About half said it was more than 100K. And 15% of the folks who responded said like an AE mishire is going to cost me more than $500,000. I'm sure that this scales depending on like which part of the org you're talking about and what are the ACVs. But Kim, how do you think about the components of the cost of an AE mishire? So if we get this wrong, what's most costly about it?
Yeah, I actually went through this exercise when I was at Paychex because I helped build out our internal recruitment division for sales. Prior to that, we just had the hiring managers responsible for hiring the reps directly. And I was like, we need a team to help them facilitate this. And we looked at hard and soft costs. So hard costs essentially being, the cost of if you were using a staffing service or placement company to hire that person, the salary and benefits. But then the soft costs are really where it starts to add up. And our numbers were closer to the 500K mark when we thought about impact to customers, impact to team, impact to morale, impact to the leader on the team having to, manage up or out that individual, training, onboarding, everything that you could possibly imagine from a soft cost perspective. And when you really start totaling it up, it was closer to that 500K per acquisition hire.
I see a lot of nodding. So is there any other context that you like?
I mean, I couldn't agree more that the soft costs matter so much more than the hard costs. And I think the other piece too is the cost of the mishire scales with the length of time that you allow it to go on. So if you figure it out and you identify it to a quarter in, that is so much better than identifying it 3 quarters in. And I think when you think about the morale of the team of letting dead weight sit around, it starts to magnify itself. So the thing I always thought about too was, okay, let's obviously try to avoid a mishire. Let's make sure as managers we're doing everything to correct if we can. But if we can't, let's make that decision quick so that the AE can move on quickly and such that our organization doesn't sort of have this lingering elephant in the room of, okay, this person's not carrying their weight and we need to get rid of them.
This is maybe one of the trickiest things. And actually Alejandro put a question here in the chat, which is like when they start showing signs, maybe in the first couple of months, like do you wait? Do you assess it 90 days? Like what was Mecca, your rubric for attacking poor performance or underperformance? And especially when you're in growth mode and you're still figuring a lot of stuff out and it's ambiguous, how did you know that you had all the right signals to say, yeah, this person really isn't going to work and I can't invest in them further to get them to be successful? Like, I'm really curious in what you did tactically and your timelines.
Yeah. So we had qualitative and quantitative goals for a ramping rep, and these started in week 1. So reps should understand, like, are you asking the right questions? Are you shadowing calls from other reps? Are you starting to convert leads into opportunities? Like, there were quite a few things on the qualitative side, like how well do you know our product? So there were quite a few things that along the way reps could see if they were falling behind peers or not. And I was always one that was very public on sort of measurements and dashboards. So everyone could just see, this is how reps ramped, and this is how I'm comparing to cohorts of ramping reps. And I think the most important thing was to always have those honest conversations early on. Like, if something's written on someone's back, they want to know. And I think it's up to us as managers and leaders to make sure that we're having those conversations very early on of like, hey, this isn't devastating, but I want to flag that you're a little bit behind your peers at this point. And having a conversation of, why do you think that might be? Mm-hmm. How can we help you catch back up? Like, again, this is not the end of the world. I've seen people self-correct. And in fact, one of the best reps I ever worked with was slower on the ramp curve in the first 2 quarters. But then they hit a certain point and just left everyone else in the dust. So I do think it's important to figure out what things are non-negotiables. Like, for me, effort is a non-negotiable. If someone's just not getting it because they're not trying hard, that is hey, it doesn't seem like you really want to be here right now. And this needs to turn around in the next 3 weeks. Otherwise, we have a problem. Versus, hey, it looks like you're struggling to figure out how to sell our API to sort of the most technical of audiences. That is something that you give a rep a lot more room to develop and turn around.
Yep. I'm curious, when you're operating at scale, so Cam or Jen, do you have just historically a percentage of reps that you would expect, hey, we're gonna make mistakes, we should be really hands-on managing performance X% of reps within the first quarter or 4, 5, 6 months?
I'm happy to take that. I don't think that we hire with the expectation that we should be managing reps out. I would instead flip it and say that I believe that when you're hiring someone, when you're going through the interview process before they start, you should set clear expectations, like show them the 30, 60, 90-day plan of what their onboarding and expectations look like. For me, I've always set the clear expectation that as long as you're meeting activity, attitude, and you're accountable for your results, I will give you a longer runway in order to meet the attainment objective. If your attitude fails, you're not driving the activity, and you're not accountable for what's going on in your business, you will have a shorter runway for me. And I have that conversation before I give them the job offer, so they know what's expected of them. I should never have to go back in the first 90 days and tell them that they're not meeting expectations if I clearly communicated it in the interview process. Instead, what happens is people will come to me and say, I know that I'm not meeting expectations because you clearly outlined it. Like, you handed it to me on a piece of paper in the interview before I accepted the job and I agreed to this. So what do I need to do in order to improve if it is a learning or skills gap to get the right support and help in order to meet these expectations? That to me says that they have a positive attitude and they're accountable, which means I'm going to give them longer runway in order to meet the attainment expectations.
In my experience, it's evident pretty early on if somebody is going to be successful or not successful. And I think it does. It drives back to those inputs. And as long as you're setting the right expectations for what those inputs should look like, you should never be waiting for the outputs, because ramp times are long. And by the time you get to someone making or not making their number, it's way too late and you have wasted just critical time. So I 100% agree with that. Clear expectations up front. These are the expectations, and early intervention, because sometimes someone just needs a little bit of help or a little bit of a pivot in the right direction to be successful. And if you intervene early, more often than not, you really can help them help themselves.
Super helpful. It sounds like you all are very confident in your ability to manage and handle this instance when you end up with somebody who's not living up to expectations. Bringing it back to the interview, we asked about confidence in ability to assess. So we asked individuals to rate themselves, like, how confident are you in your ability to assess for the most important traits in the interview process? And the CROs and heads of sales rated themselves. Only about 33% said very confident. Everybody else, like 2/3, were like somewhat confident or not very confident. And then we asked the same question directed at the team. So if you think about not just yourself, but your team's ability to effectively assess candidates on the most important traits. Literally over 3/4 of leaders were either somewhat confident or not very confident in their team's ability to assess candidates. So we spent the last 40 minutes talking about like how important this is, how you build structure, all these things that you can do to build rubrics and confidence and pattern recognition and ways that you can try to tackle unconscious bias. But at the end of the day, people still aren't confident that they can actually assess for the right things in interviews. Why do you think that this gap? Why do you think people answer like this? Like, what is it that keeps people from saying, "Yeah, I'm very confident in my ability to, and in my team's ability to assess, for the right traits and characteristics"? Jen, maybe come back to you on this.
Yeah. So, I can start here coming from my early experience at Pendo. We're just moving very, very quickly. And we have so many candidates flowing through our funnel right now that there are interviewers who are meeting with candidates who, may not have done this hundreds of times over, back to the calibration where we all know that we are 100% on the same page with assessing the critical skills, traits, and competencies that we need in every candidate. And so I imagine high growth, fast paced organizations may not know with 100% certainty that every single hiring manager and cross-functional interviewer that comes into a candidate's process is going to be 100% spot on. I think when you get to an organization that's operating at a little bit more scale and you have consistency in hiring managers and hiring teams, you can get your confidence levels up a little bit higher. I know in my personal experiences, I always had that one person who I always knew had like the best gut read on talent that I could bring in. And, they were like, 99.9 accuracy rate on whether the person was going to be a great hire or a mishire. And so until you build up that sense of confidence in your interviewers, I think it's very hard to say with 100% certainty that we're going to get the right one every time.
Kim, LinkedIn's operating at scale. There's a lot of pattern recognition. Do you think that, have you gotten to the point where everybody's super confident and this would look very different at LinkedIn, or do you still think that there's a gap, even when companies get to a more mature stage?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we are in a better position than some of the other organizations I've worked at. I think we have a best-in-class team, and I have, very experienced leaders who also have, hiring experience in their past. But we're always hiring new leaders, and it's the first time they've, interviewed. I always want them to, get the experience as quickly as possible, but sometimes you don't if you don't have high turnover on your team. And so it's the fine balance between, experience and relying on a team to help support you to get that done. The one thing I would add that triggered this thought in my mind when Jen said, that person who's got that gut instinct for hiring, I have all my leaders, when they start working for me, read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, which is all about intuition. It's not that I want them to solely rely on the intuition of hiring, but every time we've had a mishire, I've gone back to the leader and said, did you ever have a doubt when you were interviewing this person that they wouldn't be right? And they've always said yes. This is 25 years of interviews. And I'm like, what now that was your instinct trying to tell you about this candidate that we should have asked more questions on, so that they can fine tune that instinct to drive it more, so that it's correlated to asking questions around skills or competencies or traits that are applicable for the role that they're hiring for. And so I think it is a combination of that experience and intuition that allows those leaders to become more successful. But I do think when you're in a larger organization with as many resources as we have, you're going to be more confident about the ability to hire high quality people.
You said something that sounds similar to what you described earlier, which is, it's not necessarily that we didn't uncover something that was important. It's we talked ourselves out of that being important enough to say no to a candidate. And Megha, you talked about the importance of running a really effective debrief at the end. What does that look like for you? So what are the best practices when you pushed a candidate or multiple through the process and now you're sitting down to have that conversation? Who runs it? How long are you spending in it? What are the ground rules for it? How do you ensure that conversation doesn't allow us to say yes to the wrong people?
Yeah, we always try to schedule at least 30 minutes for this conversation, and our recruiter would be the one who would run the conversation. So they're a little bit, removed from the, I need to fill this seat, I need to fill this seat. I think another best practice was having the hiring manager speak last to not sort of sway the room. And I think the other sort of wrinkle that we started putting in is we added an interview sometimes after the debrief. So if we were all on board with something, but one person had a red flag, oftentimes we do a YOLO interview where someone would go back and circle back and try to get to clarity on that one missing question. And rather than feeling like, okay, we had this person on for a super day and we're supposed to have an answer back, we would just say, you know what? A wrong hire is expensive, and we should have one more chat. We tried to make it feel more of a sell chat, and we'd introduce like one of our senior execs or have someone who they hadn't met run the process, or me go back and circle to try to dig in on this. But it felt like, I would say when we pulled that extra ripcord, it was like a 50-50 hire where sometimes we'd go back and like, you know what, you were right. Like, we should not hire this person despite sort of where the panel left off. But I think in that debrief, objectivity, hiring managers speaking last, and also just like asking detailed questions. Sometimes someone would say a blanket statement of like, this person crushed it at their last job. What do you mean by that? How is that measured? And making sure that no one ever felt attacked, that in that room we were truth seeking. We're all on the same team. And making sure that we're pushing each other on statements that may not really be fully fleshed out.
I'm going to push a little bit on this. So it's like half an hour after a candidate, very tactically speaking, half an hour is a lot of time to pull everybody together. Were you batching this? Were you prioritizing, we want to have this conversation as soon as we were done with the interviews, so it's all fresh? Or were you prioritizing, it's hard to get 30 minutes on everybody's calendar, so let me get through 4 candidates and then we'll do all of them all at once? Like, very practically speaking, when you were obviously you're moving fast, that on strike, like how are you actually setting that up?
So our feedback forms were due. If you didn't submit your feedback within 4 hours of the interview, you just got angry emails over and over and over. Like, you were just like, I need to fill this out so these people stop spamming me that I haven't filled it out. Our debrief conversations could trickle, but again, candidate experience is something that we really thought about. So we would try to schedule those conversations at latest 2 days after the candidate finished their offsite. And then in some of our lower, like higher volume SMB sales roles, we might batch 2 candidates for a 30-minute session. But if it was ever a manager or a more senior hire, we would allocate a full 30 minutes for the conversation. And sometimes you knew, like, you'd look at the scorecard, see a bunch of really strong yeses, and knew, hey, this is going to be a 10-minute conversation. I'll get time back to do emails. But I'd always rather give time back than like force your way through a discussion, feel like you don't have enough time, and then just like make a decision willy-nilly.
Yep. One of the things that you mentioned was like your recruiting team, your talent partner plays an important role in facilitating that debrief. Jen, I'm curious, like, what is the ideal role, or like, what does best in class look like for you with respect to the partnership between you and your hiring managers and everybody involved on your team in the hiring process and the talent team that's supporting you?
Yeah, speed dial. Like, texting relationship is incredibly important when you're hiring at the velocity that we are. I feel very fortunate, actually, especially as a relative newbie, that my TA partner is a longtime Pendozer and a former sales rep herself. So she actually truly gets it. I love the fact that the head of TA will facilitate the debrief. And actually, we also have her facilitate a pre-brief, which I think is really important so that we all align going into the interview exactly what we need in this role from a variety of different perspectives. And then she can actually bring that back up during the debrief conversation, which I think also helps us not say, oh yeah, they were pretty good. Say, well, wait a minute, we said that we needed this and this did not come out in that interview, which also prompts us to then, go back and have, as Micah said, that final round interview that often happens after the debrief is done. But I actually think the top qualities that you need in your talent partner, they have to be super proactive. They have to flag early if we don't think we have the right talent pool, try various channels, try different strategies and approaches, and frankly, just be ruthless with following up and really forcing people to prioritize getting feedback in, getting on the phone for the debrief. Like, if we don't prioritize this as a team, it just won't happen. And there are too many other things that take over our day-to-day, and getting the right talent in the door is absolutely critical. So somebody who can actually push, they can be aggressive, they can say, we need to find this time this week, otherwise the candidate experience is going to be sacrificed.
Yeah, Kim, you've seen both sides for like both recruiter and hiring manager. But having sat on the other side, how has that colored the expectations that you set for your team and your leaders with respect to the partnership with the talent team?
Yeah, I think communication is key. I think Jen, nailed that. I think what is important is oftentimes TA partners are underutilized. They're considered sourcers and schedulers. And in reality, they should be helping consult and giving feedback on the candidate's candidacy for the opportunity. I think, I would almost rather rely on my experience at Paychex, where we were hiring thousands of salespeople, acquisition with, maybe a few years experience, where I actually preferred to manage all the scheduling myself because I wanted to see how the reps interacted with me, their sense of urgency in getting back, how they would open up their schedule, how they managed their day, what their communication style was like. It was more casual to manage it that way. And then I rather had my TA partner overseeing the feedback as we debriefed on all candidates at once, because we were doing such high volume recruiting and hiring. So we may do, 15 interviews in 2 days, and then we would sit down and do a full debrief. And that's where really I saw the magic happen, because they were able to facilitate the conversation from a neutral party perspective.
Super helpful. Last one, I mentioned at the outset that what we're building is Gong for interviews. And so we wanted to know whether sales leaders either already recorded some part of their hiring process or would be open to doing so. And almost everybody said yes. I was 86% were like, yep, I either do this already or I would be open to recording interviews. I'm curious, does that surprise you? Why do you think the number is so high? And Mecca, maybe we start with you.
I mean, my thought is this number is high because we've all been interviewing via Zoom now for the last 15, 16 months. And you asked me this question pre-pandemic, I would have been like, that feels a little just camera in the background, sitting in a meeting room. That feels a little weird. But I think there's so much that you can learn, the power of Gong in the sales organization. I mean, I listen to a sales call every morning on the Peloton, just drop into one, listen, and it was such a powerful tool. And because of how important hiring and recruiting is, I would 100% be open to it. I think it gets a little weirder if this is a turn the Zoom room camera on while two people are sitting there. It feels a little big brothery, but in the name of making better hires, I think I'd be open to it.
Yeah, so I'll chime in. We don't record today, but I do think there's something really interesting about getting into the black box, if you will, of what actually goes on in the room, as I think it opens up, your knowledge in terms of where your recruiting and hiring teams potentially need more training, where we might be honing in on the wrong areas. Secondly, those emails, Mecca, that you were referring to, those angry emails, put your feedback in. I mean, it's true. The longer you wait, the more your memory just slides. And it's really hard to remember specifics about a candidate. And especially when you're hiring at scale and meeting a ton of candidates for a particular position, they can all start to blend together. And so if you are not super deliberate about, capturing your feedback immediately after, going back and referencing it, sometimes it's really hard to remember the exact nuances of what somebody has done. And so personally, even having gone through, leading a lot of interviews myself here at Pendo, I think there's a really interesting value add about being able to go in and either validate your assumptions that you made about a candidate or dig back in if you're unsure.
Well, folks, that's a wrap. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time. Obviously, you're all building and hiring and spending a ton of time doing a lot of important stuff. The entire Revenue Collective team appreciates, and the community appreciates you sharing your wisdom and thoughts and experience with the crew. The one last thing I wanted to share before we jump off was actually a thanks to the Revenue Collective team. So we pulled this survey together, 130 people participated. We had an incentive put in place that involved giving donations to Feeding America, which is a nonprofit that provides meals to folks in need. And so together in this partnership with the survey, we were able to actually donate 3,000 meals to Feeding America, which was pretty awesome. So thank you to the Revenue Collective crew for being open to that partnership and pursuing it. And the data that you all saw today that facilitated this conversation, we're going to turn into an ebook and a whole bunch of content. There's a bunch of cuts that we can pull on company size and seniority. And so we're going to have that up on our website pretty shortly at brighthire.ai. Thanks to everybody who participated, who dialed in. Again, Jen, Mecca, Kim, thank you all for spending the time with me today. Really appreciate it. Super enlightening and fun. And good luck hiring. Go build awesome teams. Have fun, guys.
Thanks, Teddy. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Take care.